Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4AS. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well, and we are covering one of your recent video logs today
Yep.
about historical materialism.
Yeah, weighty subject. Yeah, um, very bold in what it tries to achieve and deliver on. I think, but if you're going to go down the path of being a Marxist or being a scientific socialist, historical materialism is kind of like your ABCs of how the world works. So yeah, you can't go far without historical materialism if you're going to take Marxism seriously, and if you're going to be some type of scientific socialist revolutionary, as opposed to a utopian socialist. Let's say.
Well, yeah, because that's the huge thing, right? Because all the way back to the Communist Manifesto, like that's one of the defining aspects that Marx and Engels talks about. In that
Mm.
is that the older versions was the utopian socialists,
Yeah,
and the current wave in the 19th century, at least at that time, was the scientific socialists. So, like,
yeah,
I guess
yeah.
to those that are the uninitiated, when they have heard words thrown around like scientific socialist,
Mm.
is it stemming from this concept of historical materialism?
Yeah, I think it definitely gets all of its basis from the idea of historical materialism. So,
Mm.
like, if we just kind of go to the concept itself, so um, materialism, for those of you, I guess, who maybe not have delved into much philosophy. I know I hadn't until I started researching all of this. So, materialism is kind of the idea that there is a material basis to kind of processes and an understanding of the world. There is a material reality to everything that is around us, as opposed to kind of an ideological or an idealistic perception of the world, which is more kind of insular and like the world doesn't exist outside of my mind's eye. Okay, so because my mind is processing images and stimuli that comes from the environment, then the world really, for all I know anyway, only exists inside my mind. That's kind of an idealistic um, perception of reality, where materialism is based on the fact that no, there is a universe out there, and whether we are just perceiving that or not, whatever, things still exist. And so historical materialism is kind of standing on the shoulders of this materialist worldview of things. So very much a logical, scientific, and rational perception of reality, that all things are based and have their and owe their existence to real material conditions. And so I think a lot of the thinkers around Marx's time, like this was the age of kind of, discovery, and kind of a very positive kind of point in history from a scientific perspective, I would
Right.
say. Like people were kind of enthused by scientific discovery, and kind of the perceived limitlessness of human potential thanks to the sciences, and thought very positively about how science and material thinking would basically allow humans to live these wonderful and abundant existences. And so I think historical materialism kind of goes along this train of thought where there is kind of a law to the mechanics of the universe. And for a long time, kind of, let's say, science and philosophy was answering, these big questions about why life is like this, why, certain phenomena occur in the way they do, massive kind of scientific laws and theories of things were being developed around the time that Marx and Engels were doing their thing. And I think one of the big questions that kind of remain unanswered, or without sufficient law or theory to explain it, was the progression or the development of human history. And so Marx, as an avid lover of the sciences, I think there's a lot of kind of, I don't know, this not a misconception, but like a beat up, let's say, for Marxists and socialists today to say, oh no, science in this context, or even today and around Marxist times, it was all bourgeois science. It's like it's limited by bourgeois idealism. But like that's all nonsense. Like Marx and Engels and all the people that are around them, they were men of science. They loved the sciences, and they thought actually that science stood beyond bourgeois kind of idealism, because science goes hand in hand with technology and kind of is one of the driving forces behind the mode of production and the productive forces in society. So science could almost be thought of separately to just ideologies that come from a prevailing mode of production. But yeah,
But that does link quite well with a topic we've talked about before, because it makes sense that historical materialists or scientific socialists do enjoy the sciences, because this links quite well to a previous episode that we've done, because Albert Einstein was a socialist. So
yeah, yes, interesting. And like he is quite methodical in the explanation of his approach to why socialism, even though he like doesn't actually say it openly, but he takes a very historical materialist approach to his logic. Go and read it. You can find it. Just Google it. I think you get it off archive.org. It's like 5 pages. When I was sitting there being like, I really should read this thing, I thought, Einstein had written some, 100-page book on it. But yeah, it was like a 5-page essay. Do yourself a favor and just read it. But it kind of takes on this historical materialist approach to humanity. But like what I was getting at before was, yes, Marx loves science. And so he developed an answer to whether or not there is a theory or a law that can explain human history. Maybe not all the nuance exactly and the specific levels of detail that happens at very specific moments in history, but like generally, there is a science to it. And it really goes back to materialist thinking and like the very raw form of science, like scientific laws of the universe. So like if you think about like what materialism is, it is based on the idea that there is matter in the universe, and matter is the foundation of our perceptions of things. So our brain is made of matter, and our ideas and our perceptions of the world, all of that comes from the substance itself, from the matter which is our brain. So when it comes to matter in its most natural state, the first thing, I guess you would say, that happens to matter before anything else is that it can be put into motion. And so if matter at its most basic level is matter, if matter at its most basic level can be put into motion, which most things are able to do, they are put in motion in some form or another, then the motion of history is dictated to by certain forces. And so, at a very, very fundamental level, history, in terms of how it moves, can be determined or can be explained by the forces that move it. And the forces, in this sense, are the forces of production. And that's it.
Yes.
That's historical materialism in a nutshell. And you can dive into that head first, as deep as you want to take it, and it should be able to quite systematically explain where you're at in history, why the prevailing social forces or productive forces and social relations and the mode of production and all these, fancy Marxist historical materialist terms. It should be able to explain your position in the world and why you're there, basically, at that point in time. So I think it is it's quite a good tool in order to understand our present reality, because there's a lot of explanations to kind of describe and analyze and detail why the world is so screwed up today.
Yes.
There's a lot of reasons for it, but like those things are kind of descriptions of the symptoms without describing the actual essence of what's happening. It's not based in a material foundation. It's kind of just like, oh my god, that happened, oh, and that happened, like kind of thing. And that doesn't give us really an explanation of what's going on. It just gives us something to talk about. And so, like, yeah, historical materialism gives you kind of this framework to actually look at the various events that are happening in your time right now or in the past.
Yeah.
Even potentially to predict things that might happen in the future. It just gives you a framework to kind of understand and like give you a position to bounce from. And that's why I think it's very, very effective, because nothing else really gives you that. Like everything else kind of just looks at things at the most superficial level, or like just scratches the surface of them. But like historical materialism will tell you pretty convincingly why you are at where you are at, and gives you a massive framework in order to explain things that are going on.
Well, not only that, but it's the whole concept of the idea of, we started with, I guess, our adaptations, or the human adaptation being imagination, and then us walking our way through society, and our productive forces, or at least, whether it was, as you even covered in the video log, whether it was slavery going to feudalism with the serfs, and then to the working class under capitalism. It's, the main movers and shakers in terms of creating the value. Like it is a very interesting concept, and I think a lot of people muddy what is the science with these sort of concepts and what is the ideology. Like I want to go back to a conversation we've had previously, where we did encounter socialists that was basically trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it came with capitalism. They were like, oh, every single aspect of capitalism is bad, and when we talked to them, it was like, well, no, not really. If you are a subscriber to historical materialism, you can appreciate the productive forces that capitalism has brought about. That doesn't necessarily mean that you subscribe to everything. Like, you don't have to be a Sith and deal in absolutes. Like, you can understand a productive force. Sorry?
You love that quote for it.
But it's such a good quote, though. Yeah, you don't have to be an absolutist about things. You can understand something's strong points without fully subscribing to an idea.
Yeah, and historical materialism does that. It kind of explains the progression of things hitherto, as Marxists would say, or up until this point. And like, it doesn't pass judgment on anything. I think that is fundamentally what you're talking about, and very importantly as a point. Like, there is no judgment about whether this is morally acceptable or wrong or right. In a science, there is just objective realities and like kind of facts. And so, like, if the productive forces that like enable the capitalist mode of production first to exist and then to progress in the way it has into full-on industrialization, if those forces happened, they happened because of the historical and material conditions at the time. And if they've given us, kind of wonderful productive capacities as a result of them coming into fruition, then we're all the better for it. Whether that is the most just system of doing something, whether it's based in the idea of equality or egalitarian social structures, that's a whole nother question. But if capitalism has given us some of the things that we enjoy today, and the power to make a better world as a result of its productive powers, then that is just what it is. Capitalism is an intense mode of production that has been well more, in terms of producing in abundance, has been well more productive and efficient than any mode of production that's ever come before it. And it enables, if you take historical materialism and push it, right, you really try and push it and squeeze it for all its worth, it is potentially going to give us the ability to right all the wrongs of history up until this point. In terms of, there's this idea in historical materialism that societies have never been able to deal with the problem of scarcity. So yes, all societies, advanced or otherwise, high civilizations or low, have had to deal with the idea that when they use the division of labor in their society, it never comes up with such abundance, or it's not organized in such a way that the problem of scarcity is solved, i.e. there's not enough goodies, both necessities and desirables, for all people in that society. And when you have the problem of scarcity that can't be solved by the division of labor, then you have social stratification in society. You have the formation of classes, usually built along the lines of some people own the means of production or control the means of production, and they lord that over the people that don't. And usually you have a larger majority of people that are subjected to a small ruling class of people that kind of, because of this problem of scarcity, right? Because there's not enough of the goodies to go around, they use their social power somehow to get access to more of the goodies than everyone else, and then you just have a large group of people kind of that produces for everybody else in that society. But if you go right back even before that, which is something that you were touching on before, which is the idea that humans at their core, their species being, as Marx, or young Marx would have called it, humans are, what separates us from animals basically is not the fact that we've got higher consciousness and we're just awesome, but we are productive beings. And a lot of people will say, yeah, but there's a lot of species that are productive, they produce stuff to survive, ants or bees or something like that, but they don't do it with cognitive forethought like humans do. To be human is not anything else but to want to and to carry out the production of things, to make stuff. That's what being human is.
Yes.
And that's why the whole of historical materialism can revolve around this idea of productive forces, because humans are naturally productive creatures. It's what makes us human.
Yes, and at least analyzing productive forces, it's the reason why I really like the massive David Harvey talking point about systems and analyzing them within their totality. Like, it's that
Mm,
sort of historical materialist idea that I think is really important for people, because once you do look at things in totality, then you can at least understand why within a system, especially a system that promotes scarcity, you can start to understand why there's a passing the buck sense of, well, hey, there's a problem, but it's not my job. Oh, yeah, I also realize there's a problem, but it's not my job. And
mm.
it was funny because this might be foreshadowing for maybe a future podcast episode that we'll do. But I was reading Cameron Murphy's The Great Housing Hijack recently, and I just finished a chapter where he's discussing how a Singapore expat came to Australia, and they were like they specialized in homeless care and all of that. And Cameron was talking. Sorry, no, they were brought in by a community housing provider to speak, and Cameron Murphy also was catching up with this person, and he actually mentions how Singapore solved their housing crisis, and also the housing provider was interested to get to know this person, and when they were recounting, and it's like, well, how come Singapore was so successful in doing this? And the person turned around to them and it's like, well, they gave the homeless houses. And they were like, yeah, but how was that even possible? And they're like, because they provided it at low cost. Like, this
Yeah.
this person was like, well, for me to do my job, I needed to find somewhere in order to do it. So I came to Australia. But I guess more to his point, I think he was being sarcastic at the end of the chapter. He was like, well, you can't write a fancy academic report saying the cure to housing is giving the poor houses. But more to the point with historical materialism is that when you do exist in a system, or AKA a market that promotes
Mm,
scarcity, and there are going to be winners and losers,
mm.
then it makes sense that you know, uh, what's that quote from The Simpsons? We've tried nothing, and we're out of ideas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, look, I think there's kind of two things there in the whole scarcity discussion.
Mm.
Like, look, don't get me wrong, the free market under capitalism promotes scarcity, but the modes of production themselves. So the modes that you described earlier, you have kind of the ancient mode, which is built on the idea of slavery.
Mm.
You had the feudal mode, so kind of lord serf arrangement, and then you have the capitalist mode, which is kind of the capitalist worker dichotomy. All of the modes themselves, this is the important part, it's not a market condition as such, but the productive forces, so the technology and the labor and the social relations that, hold all of the superstructure together, they have never been able to resolve or use that mode of production to solve the scarcity issue, which is there's not enough to go round for all of the people in that society to
Mm.
have access to all the necessities and all of the goodies too, not just the basic necessities, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, the scarcity issue is a market condition as well. We like to have this idea of supply and demand, which makes markets function in a healthy manner. But scarcity in the historical materialist sense is more of the idea that we, in terms of how we organize our production, aren't cutting the mustard. And the most interesting thing about historical materialism in terms of its analysis of capitalism, and this is really interesting, is that for the first time in human history, because of the wonder of the productive forces of capitalism, we do have the technical means now in order to actually address the scarcity issue.
Yes.
Like if you think about the I guess the intensity and the ability, the capabilities of industrial production, and the way that we organize labor, we divide labor in the processes today. You don't need like people standing, in like, I don't know, in production lines anymore, managing machines or as appendages to machines. We have got such complex technology that we can basically develop goods and services even on such an enormous scale that we are basically overproducing for the first time in human history. Like, look at the fashion industry, the food industry, just to name a couple. Look at the amount of waste that comes out of these systems. There is more clothing and food out there than can be delivered en masse to the populations within the industrialized world.
Yeah.
For the first time in history, we have obesity epidemics which aren't affecting the upper classes of society or the most well-off people in a society. It's affecting all of the lower classes in society. All I'm trying to paint a picture of is that for the first time in human history, we've become so good at producing goods and value production that it isn't anymore a problem of like, oh, well, there's just not enough to go around, so we're going to have to fence things off and make sure the upper classes get all the good stuff. It's not about that anymore. It's definitely not about that anymore. It's just about the fact that can we distribute all of the stuff that we produce now under the capitalist mode effectively? And that is a very different type of problem to be in compared to your feudal modes, your ancient modes, your hunter-gatherer modes, or your primitive, more primitive societies, as they say. That's a very different problem to work with. And I think it sets us up for something new.
Well, yes, I think there is a huge difference, say, in a slavery or in a feudal setting, where if you stuff up the harvest, that means your population starving, or at least a certain portion of your population starving to death, compared to this fridge that we used to make that lasts for like 20 or 25 years, we're now going to put an internal timer in it, so it's breaks down in 5 years, so you buy a new one.
Yeah.
Like it's a different kettle of fish.
It is, and that's a symptom of like the overproduction element that is being fostered and supported in the capitalist society. Now, the important thing about the development of history, though, and which I think is really interesting, the mode of production, so capitalism in this sense, or past ones like the feudalism or the ancient mode, the mode of production only lasts as long as it doesn't hold back the forces of production from doing their job and producing goodies for society. And so, like, if you think about that, right, that means that there will be a point in time where the capitalist mode, just like the feudal mode that preceded it, will no longer not just serve its purpose, but be able to justify itself as a mode of production. So, like, the problem that we're explaining here is a problem where, like, we're producing more than what we need to. We just can't get it out to everyone. Well, there is an interesting concept is in historical materialism, and comes from the philosophy around the time that Marx is writing, but is this kind of this idea that history doesn't pose a question that it doesn't have the answer to already. And so the feudal mode, let's say, already had within it, in a very infant stage or an embryonic fashion, had capitalist society within it, had bourgeois society within it. It had the towns and cities full of these bourgeois types who were then going to come over and start the bourgeois revolutions and industrialize the world and bring on the capitalist mode of production. And so capitalism within itself has the embryo of the new mode of production lying latent within its system. And so the historical materialist kind of analysis of the capitalist mode of production being now an inhibiting factor in terms of its productive power comes to this kind of conclusion that it's the working class who is this revolutionary force within the capitalist mode, and are the ones that are going to kind of, I guess you would say, challenge the system because of how they relate to it socially, not just because, you know, they have ideas, like they come up with like wild theories about revolution and wanting to, you know, take over the system and kill capitalists and make it rich, but like actual, because of the productive forces of what's happening in society, they will become the predominant class and then force a change in the mode of production. And like you can look at this very basically in terms of the complexity of the division of labor. So when like capitalist production kind of first started off, it was kind of very basic, let's call it. It was kind of in the realm of manufacture. So you know, the example that you love using, Farias, of Adam Smith and the pin factory.
Yes.
So you have like, you know, the pin, the making of a pin, like cut up into 9 separate tasks. And like at the end of the day, you have 9 people that do 9 separate things to the pin, and then you get a pin at the end of the day. That is a very basic form of industry, right? So that's and as you get these heightened technology, right? Technology gets more and more, it gets just more and more productive generally, due to advancements in science and because, or thanks to, coercive competition between capitalists. You basically have people first minding machines that are doing their job, and then they're really, after they're minding machines doing their jobs, they're becoming kind of technicians and experts in the rollout of products, thanks to basically machinery just doing the whole job. And so as kind of labor turns from like these people that are kind of pieces in the process to these people that kind of mind the machines, and then these people that are experts kind of within the productive process, not as appendages to machines, but kind of technical overlookers, let's say, in the production process, the more complex labor's relation to the mode of, or to the productive forces is, the more socialized labor is. So you have teams of people working in an array of complex arrangements and relations to one another, and in order to produce some simple products, you have teams and teams of people working across the globe to help deliver products to the global economy. And so labor becomes this very socialized enterprise. And so once you socialize the labor that's associated with the production, you then have groups of workers who understand their work in that process. They understand that thanks to how they interact with each other on a social level, all the real value and production that's coming out of the process is because of their input, not because of the capital investment done by the capitalists at the start and at the end of the process, keeping the whole thing stimulated, but because of the complex relations they have to one another and the technology that they're using. And so capitalism, by nature of the fact that it makes working so complex and so social in terms of all the different players that have to be involved to make the production sphere work, in terms of having to deal with all of this complex technology now, work and labor becomes more and more socialized. And so you naturally have people that start to think of things like socialism, where basically, if you boil socialism down to its very, very basic components, it is just workers who own the means of production or control the means of production.
Yep.
And those people then going on to making a society in which the workers rule. So they take over the political system and they use that as a transitional step onto another type of society, a communistic one. But that's that's really squeezing historical materialism for everything.
Well. No, that's fine. It's as Tommy Pickles would have said in Rugrats, we make all the cookies, we sell all the cookies, and we keep all the dimes.
Yeah. Well, that is right there what capitalism does. As it progresses and the technology gets better and better, people become more conscious of what they're doing and their technical input into the process, and they acknowledge what they are doing is just as integral as the capitalists that might put certain things into motion. And they start to question that. And they start to form societies that align with those productive interests. And that's historical materialism up until this point. And so people would like to think, I would say, they imagine that this idea of socialism is a bit pie in the sky or utopian in itself, but historical materialism turns that on its head, that idea that this is utopian and wishful thinking. It says, no, this is what the means of production do. This is what the productive forces in a society do. They push forward and they progress whether you like it or not. And it will come up with a solution to things that are holding it back, and it will drive forward anyway.
Well, yes, but also it emphasizes the fact that when people do push against it and say that it's pie in the sky stuff, historical materialism is responsible of being yeah, but you believe in the productive force capabilities of capitalism, don't you? And then the person has to agree to you. And then you're okay, if you do that, then you obviously believe that it produces scarcity, don't you? And then suddenly you have the basis or the platform to go into socialist or communist talking points. The historical materialism, because it is grounded in that science of, well, we're not only talking about imagination leading to technology changes, leading to productive forces that have led us to where we are, that it has the platform to be okay, well, history has changed. I'm sure feudalism thought it was going to last forever. I'm sure slavery thought it was going to last forever. And I now realize that people believe in, they believe that the end of the world is more likely than the end of capitalism. But that's not how historical materialism works.
No. There is a constant progression in terms of the forces of production. And I think kind of historical materialists, or historical materialism anyway, is kind of an acknowledgement that the thing, like I said right towards the beginning, is the productive push, the force that is driving human history is the productive push, is the forces of production. And they kind of are like this engine. If you could say that you build a modern car around the engine, which is true, right? It's the thing that pushes the car forward. But there's lots of other things going on in the car, all of the time. But if you think of the productive mode or the productive force as the driving engine pushing history forward all of the time, and it's just going on in the background, moving at whatever pace it wants to or it can under the mode of production. So under capitalism, this engine is chugging along, and people would describe it as chugging along in a very unhealthy manner. like given things that we've talked about on other podcasts, like, you know, global financial crises that happened recently, global pandemics, and all of the ebbs and flows of capitalism. This engine is not doing as well as it has been in the past, or it could be right now. And so you have to think, is the capitalist mode, so the shell that's sitting on top of this engine, is this holding our driving force, our productive force back at the moment? And if the answer to that at all is yes, then at some point this body of the car is going to come flying off this engine, and it will be replaced by something else. It'll be replaced by another mode of production. Now, there is kind of this interesting element in the progression of history, and you hear Marxists talk about this. Is like, you know, you've got a couple of options though. Like, it doesn't just work in the sense of like, yes, okay, the revolutionary potential in the mode of production is latent within the current system. So socialism is kind of within the capitalist system. But like, you know, it's not, I don't think, 100% sure that it will come about anytime soon, at least. And we can be thrown backwards into barbarism, as they would say, before we ever get to see the realization of a socialized mode of production.
Yeah.
That represents kind of the progression of capitalism. We can revert into something much, much more archaic than a socialized form of society, if we're not careful. And like, you can definitely see that happening at the moment. Like, look at what's going on in Europe at the moment. Like, there's just a general shift to the right, generally. And not that I'm saying that shifts to the right represent barbarism as such. People would like to put the nice name conservatism there. But if we look at the history of right-wing movements in the capitalist mode of production, they end up with more fascist kind of ideologies of political forms. And that is a descent into barbarism, if you ask me.
Well, yes, like you only have to, like, as soon as you mention that F word, like the very next thing you think of is Mussolini and Hitler, and
yeah,
but we all know how that turned out.
We all know how that turned out, but if you think of it from a historical materialist perspective, like what they did in terms of their productive capacities, like look at what the Germans did in terms of their productive capacities in the lead up to World War II. Like, they outstripped everyone in terms of their productive capabilities. So it's not unusual, it's not unnecessary, it's not unwarranted, to think that capitalism cannot evolve its social relations in order to fix problems with the mode of production being held back, if that makes sense. It can use the political structure, it can use all the various social relations and how people relate to one another. It can change them up a little bit more to keep capitalism alive. And I'm more worried about that at the moment than kind of us descending into some revolutionary period in history. I don't see that happening before capitalism tries to save itself from certain death by hanging on to, let's say, more archaic forms of social organization. I'm a lot more worried about that for it.
Yes, but as they do say, the darkest time is right before the dawn.
Yes.
But I think more to your point before that, you know, I guess we kind of have the metaphor of, you know, the Dark Ages, right? You know, you had the period of antiquity, and then the times that were leading up to the Middle Ages, or at least what we believe to be the Middle Ages, which is what we would call the Dark Ages. And I think that's more to your point, right? That in historical materialism, there are ebbs and flows. It's not exactly a um, from point A to point B kind of scenario. That
Yes,
there
yes, it would
can be
seem
ebbs
that
and
way.
flows, and naturally, when you do have a change in that sort of productive forces, um, and you do have a ruling class that is at the top of their game, they're not exactly going to be like, "Oh yeah, I knew my time would come. Let me just move to the side while you guys
Yeah,
take the reins." Like nobody
yeah,
is
it's a
like
very
that.
good point. It's a very good point, and that's why, like, yes, you do need revolutionary forces in order to kind of change the system as well.
Hmm.
Like the bourgeois didn't kind of just sit there and wait for the productive forces to say, "All right, it is necessary that you take control of the system." They had physical revolutions in order to bring that
Hmm.
into being and to put the feudal order to bed. So, yes, that is a very good point, Boreas. And, like, that's why we are revolutionaries, because we do believe that there is a level of action that needs to happen in order to make change happen. It's not just going to occur naturally. You need to fight for it,
Hmm.
basically. And yes, historical materialism does show that there needs to be some kind of kickstarting of the system in order to see substantial and systematic change. So, yeah, more positive note. Thank you, Boreas. I was going down a dark hole before.
Well, you know me. I'll always pull you back out, Mister.
Yeah, thanks, Boreas.
And you know what? I thought this was a pretty good discussion. And to finish us off is naturally the last point that we always end on. What's that synthwave art? So today's one is Frederick Engels and Karl Marx discussing historical materialism.
Yeah,
and,
right.
and it gave us this. What I find interesting about it is Marx looking into uh, Engels' face and like holding his head and being like, "Take this seriously, man."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there's a very famous shot of the two of them like that. I think there's like a sketch of the two of them. It's one of the only kind of sketches I think there must be of the two of them. And so this AI has obviously modeled off that shot because they're in a very similar pose in that. But like, no, they're not sharing hands. The AI just can't deal with hands. If you look, like, let's just say you're on social media or something like that, you can tell AI artwork because it can't handle human hands. It mashes them together or gives them extra fingers or it puts all the detail in the face and the scenery, and like when you look at hands then you can really tell you're looking at AI artwork. Just a tip for the untrained eyes out there. But like, yeah, this AI has done it. It's kind of like mashed or melted their hands
Yeah,
together. It doesn't
actually,
look like they're holding hands. They just look like they share the same hand. It's
actually,
weird.
the more that I look at it, you're right. Like at first, I thought Marx was like putting his hand on Engels' one was like, "Listen to me," but
Yeah,
like,
yeah. And
but but
yeah, no.
no, it's melding them too. I can see
Yeah,
where you go.
they've melded into one. They are now becoming the same person. So like this is just a synthwave version of that iconic sketch of Marx and Engels. And they are turning into one person through their hands. So look, if to be human is to be a productive being, and if to be productive is to use one's own hands, and the AI has made a leap here that Engels and Marx are joined together at the hand, then like, wow, this is some really like layered and intricate like thought process from the AI, and like hats off to their absolute
10 out of 10. No
10
notes.
out of 10.
Okay, and with that, everyone, remember to like, share, and subscribe this episode if you enjoyed yourself. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning, and I'll pass it off to you, Mr. A.
Thank you very much, 4AS. And yes, to reiterate, please, everyone, like, share, subscribe for more. And to all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.